Well, welcome to the second lecture, where I'm going to concentrate on basic checkmating patterns and common mistakes. So why do we study checkmating patterns? Well, the primary purpose is to better understand how the pieces work together. So we need to understand how the king and queen work together, how the queen and knight work together, how the two rooks work together, how the bishop and knight work together. And also, we need to understand how to finish a game of chess. I've actually seen games between beginners where they get down to a position like this on the screen and they don't know how to checkmate the enemy king. So we have to understand how to sort of end the game of chess. So let's study how to checkmate the king. Well, the basic principle is to put the king into a box, or to basically trap him, and then to drive him to the edge of the board, and then to deliver checkmate. Now, of course, I'm talking about, this is normally when it's at the end of the game and there's not too many pieces on the board. You can deliver checkmate with many pieces on the board and in different positions, but these simple positions, well, sometimes they're not so simple, help us to understand how the pieces work together and how to deliver checkmate. Okay, so, but in these type of positions, what we want to do is trap the king in a box and drive him to the edge of the board. The white king will then sort of come over to the black king, and then we'll deliver checkmate. So what I mean by this, like, trapping in box principle, well, just let me start by moving the queen, okay, and show you. So, here I've moved the queen to F2, and I've created a box. Notice these green arrows. The king can't cross these lines because the king is not allowed to move to a square where it's going to be captured, and actually can't move to any of the red squares or would be captured by the enemy queen. So notice how this queen sort of makes a nice little box that the king cannot get out of. What we're going to do is shrink this box when we can. So we always want to make the box smaller. We don't want to let the king out of the box or to put him in a box that's larger. Okay, so now the king has to move. Now, if the king were to actually move to D3, it wouldn't be such a good move, because the queen could actually move to F4 here, to this square here, and he'd be in a smaller box near the enemy king. So the enemy king knows that, you know, hey, basically, to be checkmated, I got to be at the side of the board and near the enemy king. So it's not interested in moving towards the enemy king or moving towards the side of the board. So it would sort of violate moving towards the king. So probably the enemy king, one of the better moves is to move to E5. Now, this may not be the quickest way to checkmate, and I don't need any comments about the absolute shortest way to checkmate. In most games, you're just concerned about checkmating the king, okay? So once again, we're going to use the principle of making the box smaller. Or just move the queen up to F3, and notice we've made the box a little bit smaller. Okay, notice with the green arrows, and the king cannot move to any of the squares highlighted in red again. Okay, so the king obviously not wanting to move towards, it could move to D4, but let's say the king moves to D6. Okay, now here the queen is going to make the box even smaller. Okay, notice how it's making the box the king can exist in even smaller and smaller. And I've highlighted the squares that the king cannot move to in red. And notice this, the king is sort of along this edge here. It sort of maybe wants to escape over to here. So if we were to actually move the queen to D4, giving check, the king could easily just move over to this side and be in a larger box, which is not what we want. Okay, so let's then say the king moves to d7. Great. We'll just make the box just a little bit smaller. Okay, notice with the green arrows, this box is even smaller, and the king cannot move to any of these red squares or would be captured by the queen. So the king cannot move to these squares. Now let's say the king moves to c6. Okay, starting to realize now if I just back up, I'm going to be at the edge of the board. I might as well try to fight. What we can do now is that, like I said, we need to eventually move the white king up. So if you can't really make the box smaller, you know, like for example, we don't want to come up and check the enemy king on e6. Notice I haven't really checked at all. I haven't run around checking the king at all. What I've been doing is limiting his squares where he can run to. So now we're just going to, I know I'm going to have to move this white king eventually towards the black king. Since I really can't make the box smaller, I probably can make it the same size by even moving to d4 or doing something that makes it a tad smaller. But I'm just going to bring my king up because I know I can do it, or I'm going to have to do it, so I'm just going to move him to d2. Now, the king is going to move back to d7. And now, actually, I'm going to choose to make the box a little bit smaller. I could have done this in the previous move, but I was just showing you I can bring my king closer. So the queen can move to f6 now, making this box. I mean, before it was sort of a square type box, and now it's more like a rectangular box. So notice how the king is trapped in this box, and it can't move to any of the squares highlighted in red. Okay, let's say the king decides to move over one. I'm just going to move the queen over one and make the box smaller. Okay, notice just the normal highlights, how the box is smaller. The king moves over one more. I'll say, great. I'll move the queen over one more and make it smaller. Once again, notice I'm not needlessly checking the king. I'm just making where he can run smaller. Now basically the king is forced to go to the edge of the board. Notice this. So it only has 3 squares to move to, and it's on the edge of a board. So the king moves, let's say in this case, to c8. Now this is basically we've kept the king in a box. We've driven him to the edge of the board. Okay, so we want to keep him on the edge of the board. So I'm going to move my queen to e7, and now he is trapped along the other edge of the board. He cannot move. In fact, he can only exist on 3 squares: a8, ace, a8, b8, and c8. He can just go between those, and that's what he's going to do. He's just going to go back and forth. And now I do have to bring my king up. Okay, and then I'll deliver checkmate. So now the king will just go back and forth. I'll bring my king up. King's just going to go back and forth. Bring my king up. Okay. And now I've drawn in red the 2 squares that the queen can checkmate on. Most people will probably move it to b7 to deliver checkmate, but actually the queen can also go to this square. Actually, these 2 squares here. So actually the queen can deliver checkmate in 4 different ways. Okay, the queen actually moves to one of these 3 squares. What's happening is that it's checking the king, and it's also sort of covering these squares. Okay, while the king is covering these squares. And then